Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial on Edius Pro 9. And even though we are using version 9, most of the things that we will show you in today's tutorial will also be possible in previous versions of Edius. So even if you are working with version 6, 7, 8, the things that we will show you today should be possible. Let's open up our project, and I believe where we left off was right here at the teacher. Yet I think what we decided in our last tutorial was that we would now jump to the final completed edit and point out a few things. I think that'll go faster if we just search through the timeline and find some of those irregular clips and show you how to work with them. First of all, we have a grouping here of some still shots that talk about the history of South Sudan. So how did we work with still shots in Edius Pro? Let's maybe first of all remove the still shots that are there so that we can just kind of rebuild this section. But first of all, let's place these back into our bin in a way that we'll be able to find them quickly. I think most of these were Shutterstock images. Let's just click on our folder there and make a new folder. And so we've made a new folder here. It's an empty folder. And this is kind of a neat tip to keep in mind, is that at any point you can grab media that's on the timeline and drop them into a bin for access. So you just grab that whole section there. Maybe I should have pointed out how we did that. It's kind of a lasso effect. You take your mouse and you go and scroll through the grouping of images that you want, or group of media. And so you've selected a group, and then you can just point to any one of those and you'll be moving or grabbing the whole group of clips and just drag them into our bin. And so now as we delete this whole area, just to grab them again, the whole area, just hit the delete key, they're gone. And so now we can start to rebuild this section using these still images. Let's grab the first one and put it into place here. And this first one already seems to have the appropriate aspect ratio, so we may not have to do too much with it. It's a little bit green, so we probably will want to do some color correction on that. But first of all, let's just open up our timeline here a little bit, and so that we can place it a little better so there's no gap there. Now, we do have a comprehensive tutorial on the color correction tools of Edius, but maybe I'll just quickly show you what you can do with this. Let's go to the Effects palette. Just click on Effects, and let's go to Color Correction and look for the primary color correction filter. Let's just drag that on our clip, and then you'll see that it shows up here over in the Information palette. And just double click on it there, and let's reduce some of the green in this shot. And there are several ways to do that with this color correction tool, but what I like to do is go down to the Curves tool, select the green, and just pull back on the midtones a little bit. So we're reducing the green. It's already getting kind of magenta, so we might not want to do too much to that. Let's go back to the Y curve and just give it a little bit more definition there. Maybe warm it up a little bit with the temperature slider. Okay, well, I think that looks better. And like I say, we do have a much more comprehensive tutorial on the color correction tools of Edius. Let's not spend too much time about that. Just know that there are tools within Edius that can help you with color correction. And I'll put a link up here at the top as to where you can access that tutorial. All right, so still shots come in by default at about 5 seconds. Now you are able to change that default time to 3 seconds or 10 seconds, whatever you like. But we find that 5 seconds is a good way to drop it in. And of course, you can always reduce the amount of time that still image is up on the timeline just by grabbing the end of it and dragging it in, or for that matter, stretching it out. And you can have that still shot up as long as you like, just by grabbing the end there. So let's go after our next shot here in our bin and bring it down. And as we look at this one, we see we have black bars on each side. And this is more typical of the way a still image will come in. The aspect ratio of most still images is not 16 by 9. Of course, you can set that on some cameras so that you're making 16 by 9, and That's perhaps what this one was. But most shots are going to come in the wrong aspect ratio. But it's easy enough to fix with your shot selected, just by pointing to it and clicking on it. Just hit the F7 key, and that opens up our layouter tool. And the layouter tool is actually an amazing, wonderful tool that you'll find very useful in your work, and a good tool to get to know. Maybe we'll spend a whole tutorial learning the different things that you can do with the layouter tool. But for today's lesson, let's just take a look at how we can enlarge this photograph so that it fills our whole screen. And the way we do that, first of all, let's reduce the percentage that is shown on the screen down to 25% so we can see what we're doing a little better. And let's make sure over here under stretch that preserve frame aspect ratio is checked. It is usually by default, so you should be fine there. But once this is checked, we can grab any corner of our shot and just drag it out, and it will now fill the whole screen. And if you need to reposition that to get a better composition, you can just point to anywhere in the screen and move it up or down. All right, and of course another way you can do it is use the sliders here. Just point to the percentage, and as long as you have this checked, it doesn't matter which one you point to and move, the other is going to move along with it, and just move it up and down. All right, and once you're happy with that, just hit OK, and we'll go after the next shot. And this has the same issue, so let's go into our layouter tool and change our view there and stretch it out to fill the frame. And we need to reposition this a little bit, and maybe we can just make this a little bit more focused on the signing there. And that looks good. Okay, next shot is people happy about their new independence, showing their flag. And it needs the same treatment there. And so let's fill the frame with this one and bring it down just a little bit. And this one's overexposed quite a bit. Let's maybe quickly go into our effects palette, choose color correction tools, primary color correction, and we see it shows up over here in information palette. Let's just double click on that, and let's go straight for our curves tool to see what we can do about this shot. We can try starting with the midtones, just bring it right down, and the faces are already pretty well exposed, so I'm going to leave the darks pretty much alone, maybe even lift them up just a little bit. But the rest of the shot we can bring down quite a bit. Try and bring down those highlights. We can even grab the very top node and bring it down. And okay, well I think that looks better. Let's hit OK. And one last shot. Let's go back to our bin and grab this one. Now it's a little bit longer than what we need. It's going to overwrite our next shot. Remember, they're by default 5 seconds. And still shots are not something that you can just you can bring them over into the play monitor, but you can't define an in and out. It's an exact 5 seconds. So probably the best way to handle this is just to drag it down in such a way that it is overwriting the previous still shot. It's easy enough to make adjustments after you pop it in. You just grab that area in between and slide it back. And so that's probably how I would handle that. Looks like we need to fill the frame on this one as well. And just stretch it out and reposition. Hit OK. And now we have our still shots in place. Now, still shots by definition are a little bit boring. You've been moving from real video into a still shot. And so to add a little bit more interest and engage the viewer a little bit, what I like to do is apply what's called the Ken Burns effect. If you've ever watched any of the Ken Burns documentaries, you'll know that he has applied an effect to all of the still photographs that he has to work with in his documentaries because they're almost all historical. And so what he does is he takes a photograph and he slowly pushes into it. Perhaps when he first started this, he was using a camera, but now we can do it digitally as we do the edit. And let's show you how you can do that in Edius. Just again, using our layouter effect, using the F7 key. Let's bring this shot in. You might have noticed that the color changed when we clicked into this. You'll find this happening a lot as you work with different layers of effects that you may have applied to your video. You'll find that if you should select a layer that's above another, that everything below it is going to disappear while you're working on that layer. So don't be alarmed if when you open up one of the layers of your effects, everything changes. It's just temporary while you work on that effect. And as soon as you close out your effects window, you'll get all of the other layers will show up again. Okay, so how do we do the Ken Burns effect? And it could be that when you opened up your layouter tool, it looked more like this. And you may be thinking, well, my layouter tool isn't like what you're showing me. Well, how do I get that? It's just a matter of going into the layouter tool right at the bottom there and watch for your cursor to change to an up and down arrow. Click down with your mouse and then stretch that down. Now you see a nice timeline window showing here where we can add effects over time. And in another tutorial, we'll talk about how you can have your effects change over time using this timeline inside your layouter tool. But for now, let's just show a small push in. And what I do is go over here and click on the layouter option here. And then you'll see nodes appearing here. And what we want to do, what I find the fastest, is just go click the top node, and that applies all of the nodes for all of the effects that we could do to this at the same time. Rather than going out and figuring out which one I need to do a slow push, I find it just faster just to hit the all key. And then take your timeline cursor and stretch all the way down to the back end of it. And now let's change our view down to 50% again. And let's just grab any corner here and just stretch it out just a little bit. We don't want it to be too much. If you pull this out too much, the zoom or the push is going to be too harsh. It's going to be too fast. We want this to be very slow and subtle as we watch our still image. Let's see what this looks like. Let's hit OK and go back to our timeline and take a look and see how that is.
During the Civil War, when we were trying to break away from Sudan and become our own country.
Yeah, that's about right. And so now let's just do that to all of our clips. Let's click on this one here, hit F7 and repeat.
Our own country. I don't remember any of that myself. A peace agreement was made.
Well, we won't take time to do it to all of them, but you get the idea of how quickly you can add a nice slow push into your shots. And if you find that it's going too fast, if the push is too fast for you,
I don't remember.
Well, it's just a matter of going into your layouter tool again, sliding your timeline cursor across to the end so that it's right over the last two nodes, and then pulling back on how much you expanded it there. Hit OK, and now it'll be a slower push.
I don't remember any of that myself.
All right. Now, one other thing you should know is if at any point along the line you decide that, oh, you know, maybe a nice dissolve in between those two shots would look nice. If you put the dissolve in between two clips where you've added the Ken Burns effect, what's going to happen is that halfway through the dissolve, the slow push is going to stop. And it's noticeable. And so what you want to do is, after you've applied your transition, go back into your shot, hit the F7 key, make sure your nodes are at the very end of each end, and do the same to the next clip. and hit OK. And now any transition that you've added to the first shot is going to continue right to the end of the transition. And for the second shot, because we went in and we put those nodes back at the beginning of the time, now the slow push of the second shot is going to start at the beginning of the transition. So that's important to know. All right, what else can we show you here? Okay, here's an interesting situation here. Here's our audio down here. And I've adjusted the audio here. When I first edited this, the audio was identical to the clips. The class, we see the classroom shot.
Strong new nation together.
Then it goes out to the outdoor classroom, one that's happening out under a tree. Well, what if we wanted to start hearing that singing while we were still inside the classroom? We could kind of hear it outside before we see it. And a lot of times you'll want to do that. It adds a nice effect and warmth to your video to start hearing audio before you see the video. And so how do we do that in Edius? First-time users to Edius might say, well, I'll just go down and grab a hold of that audio and stretch it back. But you'll notice what happens when you do that is that the video also scrolls back. And that's because the video in Edius, by default, the video is grouped together with the audio. They're connected. And so if you just point to either one of these, if I point to just the video and try and scroll it back, it's also going to bring the audio back. And that's handy. You want that. You don't want to have to take the time to click both the audio and the video before you make any edits. So it's good to have that by default. But what about those times when you want to change the audio separate from the video? How do we do that? Well, it's just a simple matter of before you point to your audio track, to hold down the Alt key. Don't just hit it once. Hold down your Alt key and then point to your audio, and you'll notice that that's the only one that's selected. The video portion was not selected. So now when we slide the audio back, all we're going to be doing is sliding back on the audio track itself. So now
Strong new nation together.
we start to hear that audio before the video, and that's nice. Now you'll see that the audio comes on gradually, and that's because in my edit I made that change. If we had just done this from scratch, the audio would be looking more like that, and it would come on too abruptly. While we're watching the classroom scene, the audio from outside would just be too loud.
Strong new nation together.
And we want it to come on more gradually, so we would go in and this time, without the Alt key selected, just point to the little orange band there for your that shows your audio. Click on the very end part there, and you just drag it down, all the way down. So now the audio is going to come on gradually.
New nation together. Unfortunately, after a couple years of peace...
Okay, so we have a little slow motion effect here. And you might be wondering, well, how do I add slow motion to a video? So maybe just delete this and see how we did this. So we have a normal speed video clip. First of all, before we show you that, maybe I'll show you how to make a freeze frame. A lot of times editors want to do this. The video is rolling along and all of a sudden it freezes at a certain point. How do you do that in Edius? Let's do that with this clip here. Pick any frame that you want. Let's say right about there. And go over to the top part of your timeline menu. If you've been following all of our tutorials, you should have an icon of a camera there. And just click on that and it will show up. The still frame will show up here in the bin that was open. And you just have to simply drag and drop that down into place. It looks at the moment like it's going to go too far. Remember, it's a default of 5 seconds here. If you find that any still shot or any camera shot or freeze frame that you took is too long to fit in the gap that you want to work with, rather than place it down on video 1 and overwrite what you might have further down the timeline, you can just put it on video 2, let your mouse go, make your adjustments, and then bring it down. Now it's important to place this clip right where the timeline cursor ended up so that it's a nice clean freeze frame. So that's how you do a freeze frame. Now, if you haven't followed our previous lessons and you don't have the camera there, maybe I'll just show you real quickly how to do that. It's under Settings, User Settings. Open that up, go down to User Interface, go down to Button, make sure that the timeline option is selected here. And now in this side, look for the camera icon. And when you find it, it's not showing up right now because it's already over here. But let's say this was our camera. When you just select it once, hit the arrow key to bring it over into our other section, and then hit apply and hit OK. And then you'll have it showing up here. Okay, so let's now take a look at this slow motion that we did. So let's do an undo here and get rid of our freeze frame. So then what we can do, let's find that point in the video where we want to start our slow motion. Let's say it's right here. Let's go into our clip, select it, hit the cut, just the C key, to divide that clip right at that point. Now we can select the second portion of our clip and right-click on it and go down to Time Effect and go over to Speed, and right now it's at 100%. What we want to do is reduce that down to about, let's say 20%. Now, in addition to changing the speed, we also want to go over here to Field Option and choose a method of interpreting the fields as it applies that slow motion effect. Edius gives you several options. You can choose to have the frame select the nearest neighbor and work with that. You can choose to select frame blending, or you can choose optical flow. And you might have to experiment with all three options to get the most pleasing look. But these days, with the latest version of Edius, and we're talking Edius 9.3, if you're working with the latest version, I believe it's safe to say that optical flow is going to be your best option for this. And in addition to making that choice, you have several options. I would say this video clip is probably not that complex. We could probably get away with high speed, but let's maybe choose medium quality. So optical flow, medium quality, hit the OK, and the OK again. And now our clip is going to be at 20%. Let's just stretch it out. Let's maybe get rid of the audio that was there. And now let's just stretch that out.
Unfortunately, after...
Now, normally when you make a slow motion clip, you would have to bring the audio way down because it's just so garbled and slow. It just doesn't help at all. But in this particular case, I did leave it on to give that kind of emotional effect of how the children were so happy about the new country of South Sudan and everything was going to be great, but then all of a sudden it fell apart. And we might want to reduce the audio a little bit. So you can see by the optical flow that we added, it's actually a very nice smooth motion. All right, so that's slow motion. We might point out, let's just right click on this again, that in addition to doing slow motion, this is the tool that you go to if you want to reverse the motion. If you want a clip to just play completely backwards. Let's change this back to 100%. You can either do it by adding a negative 100%. If you applied that, it would play the clip completely in reverse, or just choose one of these radio button options. It looks like when I put the negative there, Edius automatically placed the radio button option in backward. So now, I don't know if it'll be so obvious with this because it's just two hands clapping, but let's see. Yeah, you can notice how it's playing backwards. Okay, so if you ever need to to play a clip backwards, that's how you do it. It's using the slow motion or the time effect and then speed. Okay, let's see what else we got here that we can show you in this video. Okay, yes, this is some footage that was supplied to me for this video project by the United Nations. And you'll notice that it's really pretty bad. I think it was shot on a cell phone, and by the time it got to me, I think it had gone through several stages of editing, and what might have been shot with a frame rate of 29.97 or 30 frames a second on a cell phone was then edited on a timeline of 25 frames a second for PAL countries. And then I got it, and I'm placing it on a timeline that's 29.97. So you can see that there's going to be some problems with this clip. So how do you work with these clips? Well, first of all, if you get a clip sent to you from a source, something like this, either from a cell phone or from another country. Most countries in the world use a frame rate of 25 frames per second. But in North America, we use 29.97 for broadcast. That's NTSC versus PAL. And so if you're getting footage sent to you from outside of North America or Japan, you are going to probably be working with footage that was shot at a frame rate of 25 frames per second. Or let's say you get footage from a film student. Film students, even if they're in North America, they like to shoot their stuff at what's called a film rate, and that's 23.98 frames per second. And then there's some cameras that get it all confused, and in their menu options, they just put 24 frames a second when they're really shooting 23.98. Or the menu says you're shooting at 30 frames a second when you're really shooting 29.97. So there's a lot of potential for problem when you're getting footage sent to you from the outside. How do we find out what it was shot at? Well, the first thing that you do is right-click on the footage and go down to Properties. And this will give you a lot of information about the footage itself. And as we look at it, we see the footage, at least the way we got it, is at a frame rate of 25 frames per second. We don't know that that was what it was shot at. It could be what it was edited at, and we got the edited video. So how do we do this? How do we handle this? How does Edius handle this? Well, first of all, what Edius does, when you bring in foreign footage, or let's say footage that is at a different frame rate than your project settings, and if you're not exactly sure what your project settings are, you can find out by going up to Settings, go to Project Settings, and this gives you the information of what frame rate your project was started at. And we can see that this particular project that I'm working on is set at an NTSC frame rate of 29.97. But the footage is at 25 frames per second. So what's going to happen? What does Edius do with this clip when we drop it on a project that's set at 29.97? Well, Edius will do its best to automatically conform that piece of video to the settings of the project. So in theory, you shouldn't have to worry about it. You know, the tagline of Edius is edit anything, right? And the idea is that you can throw anything on the timeline and Edius will take care of it. However, you should know that there are ways that you can go in and enhance the piece of footage to make it look a little bit better than what Edius does by default. And so I'd like to show that to you right now. Actually, we just saw it. Just go right-click and again, go over to Time Effect. And this time, rather than choose Speed, go down to Field Options, and that will take us directly to the Field Option dialog box that we just saw. And again, the best option now is to choose Optical Flow. And with a piece of footage like this that has so much problems, I would probably even go up to high quality or highest quality and let this new tool of Edius do its best work with this very difficult piece of footage. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, this optical flow option is kind of new to the latest version of Edius. The optical flow was there before, but the options to have these high quality renders of optical flow, I don't believe were there before 9.3. Okay, so that's what I would choose for any clip that you're bringing in that is with a foreign frame rate, a frame rate that is different than your project settings. I would use the optical flow and one of these high quality, highest qualities. And that will do the best job possible of taking care of any motion artifacts that might be showing up as a result of bringing in foreign footage. Let's take a look at it. It might not play in real time for you after you apply that highest quality optical flow.
Many people have run away from their homes and are hiding.
It'll probably stutter a little bit. I've even got this at half resolution, but it's still stuttering a little bit. And that's okay, because when you go to export it, Edius will take it frame by frame and apply its best use of the optical flow plugin there. Well, I think that probably does it for this third and I think probably final episode of our little mini-series on how to edit with Edius. I think from this point we'll start concentrating on the effects of Edius, go through some of the possibilities that you have to work with here as far as adding color correction filters and different transition effects that come with Edius. And so we'll have a lot of fun with those. All right, if you'd like to take a look at the final product of this little video about the girl in the refugee camp, I'll put up a link here so that you can take a look at that. But otherwise, I think that probably does it for this training exercise on how to edit with Edius. If you found these videos helpful, please go ahead and give us a like. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section below. If you'd like to see more videos on Edius, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't yet, and ring that bell so that you can be notified each time we put up a new video. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you down the road.